Ronda Rousey had just finished a long day at a charity event, where she had met fans, posed for pictures, and shared stories about her journey as an athlete. She was tired, but there was a sense of peace in her mind. She loved connecting with people and helping in any way she could, and today had been fulfilling. After all the interviews and handshakes, she decided to take a small break before heading home. She wanted a moment of normalcy, a chance to be just like anyone else. She walked into a small cafe that she had passed many times before but had never entered. The place was cozy and welcoming, filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and baked goods. The chatter of customers and the soft music playing in the background made it a pleasant escape from the crowded charity event. Ronda moved slowly, taking it all in, feeling the simplicity of the moment. She ordered a coffee and a pastry, hoping to sit quietly and enjoy her break. The cafe was busier than she expected. A few families were scattered across the tables, and some people were working on their laptops. There was a line at the counter, and Ronda found herself standing behind a few people, keeping her head down to avoid drawing attention. Even though she was a public figure, she liked moments where she could be unnoticed, where she could blend into the background without anyone asking for an autograph or a selfie. As she waited for her order, she noticed a police officer at the counter speaking loudly on his phone. He seemed frustrated, gesturing at the staff in a way that made it clear he was upset about something. Ronda kept her distance, hoping to stay out of any conflict. But as she moved to adjust her position in line, her shoulder accidentally brushed against his arm. It was a small, unintentional touch, but it was enough to trigger an explosive reaction. The officer turned abruptly, his face flushed with anger. He looked Ronda up and down, his eyes narrowing. Without thinking, he reached out and slapped her across the face. The cafe went silent. Customers froze, some dropping their phones as they tried to process what had just happened. No one could believe what they had just seen. Ronda's hand flew to her cheek, but she didn't yell or fight back. She stood there, shock and disbelief running through her mind, but she remained composed. Ronda had faced many challenges in her life. She had been in countless fights, experienced pain, and faced criticism from every direction. But being slapped by someone in authority, someone who was supposed to protect and serve in such a public and humiliating way, was something different. The hurt was not just physical, it was the shock of being treated unfairly and without respect. Yet even in that moment, Ronda's mind was clear. She knew that reacting impulsively would only escalate the situation. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The officer was still glaring at her, expecting a reaction, but Ronda chose calmness. She looked him in the eyes and asked in a firm yet controlled voice why he had done that. Her words were calm, measured, but carried a strength that could not be ignored. The room remained silent, all eyes on the scene unfolding. Some of the cafe customers stepped forward, concerned and ready to intervene, but Ronda held up her hand, signaling them to stay back. She didn't need anyone to fight her battles. She had always believed in handling conflicts with her mind, not just her fists. She had faced bigger challenges in the ring, and she knew that this was a moment that required patience and composure. The officer's expression began to change. The anger that had been blazing in his eyes started to flicker as doubt crept in. He was taken aback by her reaction. He had expected fear or submission, but instead he was met with calm strength. The silence in the cafe was heavy, and the murmurs of the customers made the officer realize that he was being watched and judged. The weight of his actions began to sink in. Ronda continued speaking, explaining that she had not done anything wrong and that everyone deserved respect, regardless of the situation. Her voice remained steady, firm, and respectful. She didn't shout or insult him. She simply stated the truth. The simplicity of her words, combined with her composed demeanor, made the officer pause. He realized that he had lost control of the situation and had acted unjustly. The tension in the room was palpable. Customers were recording the incident on their phones, some whispering words of support for Ronda, others shaking their heads in disbelief at the officer's actions. The officer attempted to apologize, but his words were awkward and uncertain. It was clear that he was struggling to find the right thing to say. Ronda nodded slowly, accepting his apology, but she made it clear that such behavior was not acceptable. She didn't hold a grudge, but she didn't ignore the wrongdoing either. The moment was a powerful reminder of the importance of respect and accountability. Ronda's composure had turned what could have been a chaotic and violent confrontation into a lesson for everyone present. The officer had acted impulsively and without justification, but Rhonda's response highlighted the strength that comes from self-control, dignity, and clear communication. As the situation began to calm, Rhonda finally collected her order. She thanked the staff quietly and moved to a corner table, sitting down to enjoy her coffee and pastry. The customers returned to their activities, though the atmosphere remained charged with the memory of what had just happened. Rhonda, however, felt a sense of calm. She had faced an unexpected challenge and she had handled it with grace and poise. The officer, meanwhile, stood at the counter, visibly shaken. The embarrassment of being witnessed and recorded had replaced his earlier anger. He had acted without thinking, and now he had to live with the consequences of his actions. The experience was humbling, and it forced him to reflect on his behavior, his temper, and the way he treated others. Rhonda's day continued quietly after that. She finished her coffee, exchanged a few polite words with the staff, and left the cafe with her head held high. She had turned a moment of humiliation into a moment of strength, showing that true power lies not just in physical ability, but in the way a person carries themselves, even in the face of injustice. This incident, though brief, would not be forgotten. It was a reminder to everyone present that respect and dignity should never be taken lightly. Ronda Rousey had faced the unexpected with calm courage, and in doing so, she left a lasting impression on those who witnessed the event. It was a story of restraint, integrity, and the quiet strength that comes from believing in oneself and standing up for what is right, without losing composure or humanity. After leaving the cafe, Rhonda walked slowly down the quiet streets. The city had changed from the busy hum of the charity event to a softer rhythm, the evening settling in with a gentle breeze. She tried to focus on normal things, the warm glow of streetlights, the distant sound of laughter from nearby parks, but her mind kept replaying the incident at the cafe. She was proud of how she had handled herself, yet it was impossible not to feel the sting of humiliation from being slapped in public. Even heroes, she thought, face moments of vulnerability. She had spent years in the spotlight, in fights where every move was scrutinized, but this was different. This wasn't a competition with rules, a match where the outcomes were controlled and expected. This was real life, messy and unpredictable, and she had been tested in a way she hadn't anticipated. Her hand still tingled from the slap, a sharp reminder that power could be misused when unchecked. Rhonda decided to call a close friend, someone she trusted completely. She needed to talk, not to vent anger, but to process what had happened. Her friend listened carefully, offering support and reminding her of her strength. They discussed the importance of staying calm and composed, of showing that true strength was more than physical. It was moral and emotional. Rhonda felt reassured, but she also knew that the incident would linger in the public eye once people saw the videos online. That realization brought a mix of frustration and determination. The next day, the cafe incident had already begun circulating on social media. Clips showed the officer slapping her and her calm, measured response. Comments poured in, a mixture of shock, support, and criticism. Many people admired how Rhonda had remained composed, refusing to retaliate physically. Others expressed anger at the officer, demanding accountability. Rhonda didn't read everything, but she knew the incident would spark a conversation about respect, authority, and the treatment of civilians. Rhonda understood that moments like this could be powerful beyond personal experience. Her calm reaction had set an example, and she felt a responsibility to speak further if needed. But she didn't want to overplay it to seem like she was seeking attention. Instead, she focused on small, meaningful ways to continue spreading the message of respect and human dignity. She drafted a few thoughts intending to share them if asked, emphasizing calmness, accountability, and the idea that no one should be humiliated, regardless of their status or profession. Meanwhile, the officer involved was facing his own internal reckoning. He had gone home that evening feeling frustrated and embarrassed, replaying the incident in his mind. He realized that he had acted out of anger and impulse, not reason. What had seemed like a momentary loss of control now carried consequences he hadn't anticipated. The videos online made it clear to him that his actions were public, witnessed, and judged. He couldn't ignore the fact that he had humiliated someone unjustly, and that his behavior reflected poorly not only on himself, but on the badge he wore. At the police station, he was called into a meeting with his supervisors. The discussion was formal yet firm. They expressed disappointment, emphasizing the importance of professionalism and respect in all interactions with the public. The officer tried to explain that it had been a stressful day, that the crowd and the noise had overwhelmed him, but they insisted that stress was never an excuse for aggression or humiliation. He left the meeting with a mix of shame and realization, understanding that he needed to take steps to make amends. Ronda, on her part, continued with her day-to-day life, yet the incident remained in her thoughts. She visited a training gym, practicing techniques and reminding herself that physical skill was paired with mental discipline. She reflected on the moments when calmness had been her greatest strength, and she understood that the cafe incident was another lesson in resilience and human behavior. It was not just about being strong in the ring. It was about being strong in life, handling unexpected challenges with composure and grace. Friends and colleagues reached out to Ronda, offering their support and admiration. Some shared stories of their own experiences with unfair treatment or public humiliation, finding courage in her response. Others wanted to ensure she knew she wasn't alone and that her reputation remained untarnished. She appreciated the messages, understanding that even though the incident was personal, it had a ripple effect on those who watched and learned from it. Days passed, and the officer grew increasingly aware of the consequences of his actions. He had received formal reprimands, but the personal weight of guilt was heavier. He realized that an apology alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to reflect, to learn, and to actively change the way he interacted with others. The public scrutiny added urgency to his self-reflection, but deep down, he knew that the lesson was more profound than public perception. It was about becoming a better person. Ronda's story continued to inspire discussions about authority, respect, and restraint. Articles and blogs analyzed the incident, highlighting the significance of her composed response. Some noted the unusual strength required to face humiliation without retaliation, while others emphasized the officer's opportunity for redemption. The story became a reference point, a real-life example of how calmness and dignity could transform a potentially explosive situation into a moment of reflection and growth. Despite all the attention, Ronda remained grounded. She avoided media frenzy and focused on her personal routines, her training, and the people she cared about. She spent time mentoring young athletes, sharing lessons about resilience, discipline, and respect. She emphasized that true strength wasn't just about physical skill. It was about integrity, patience, and maintaining composure in the face of unfairness. The cafe incident became part of her story, a chapter that reinforced the values she lived by. The officer, in turn, started attending sensitivity and professional training sessions. He met with mentors and counselors to better understand the impact of his actions. He began to see the incident not as a single mistake, but as a turning point in his personal and professional life. The shame and regret he felt were transformed into motivation to change, to act with more awareness, and to ensure that no one else would be subjected to the same humiliation. Meanwhile, Ronda continued her work in public appearances, always mindful of the incident but refusing to let it define her. She spoke in interviews about the importance of staying calm, setting boundaries, and handling conflict with respect. Her message was clear. No matter the circumstances, dignity and patience could turn a moment of anger and humiliation into an opportunity for learning and reflection. The cafe incident became a story that people shared not just for its shock value but for its lesson. It reminded the public that anyone, regardless of fame or physical strength, could face injustice, and that the way one responds defines character more than the challenge itself. Ronda's reaction became a symbol of courage beyond physical prowess, inspiring others to handle conflict with wisdom rather than aggression. In those days following the incident, both Ronda and the officer lived with the aftermath in very different ways. Ronda carried her strength outward, using the event to reinforce her values and inspire others. The officer carried his regret inward, reflecting on his actions and striving to improve. The contrast between their responses became part of the lesson for the wider public. Strength comes not from dominance, but from integrity, respect, and the ability to learn from mistakes. Through it all, Ronda never lost her sense of humanity. She interacted with people as she always had, with kindness, respect, and authenticity. She showed that even when faced with unfairness, Maintaining composure and dignity could leave a deeper impression than any physical confrontation. The incident at the cafe became a quiet but powerful story, one that would be remembered not for the slap, but for the grace with which she handled it and the lessons it brought to everyone involved. The officer woke up the next morning feeling restless. The incident at the cafe kept replaying in his mind, like a loop he couldn't escape. Every detail of the event haunted him. The sound of the slap, the stunned faces of the customers, and the calm, unwavering look in Ronda's eyes. It was not just the public embarrassment that weighed on him. It was the realization that he had abused the authority given to him, and he had done it to someone who had not deserved it. He walked into work quietly, trying to avoid colleagues, but it was impossible to escape the whispers and knowing looks. The story had spread fast, reaching his peers and supervisors. He felt the sting of judgment in every glance, the silent reprimand that no words could convey. For the first time, he began to understand the true weight of his responsibility as a police officer. His role was meant to protect and serve, not to assert power for personal frustration. Meanwhile, Ronda moved on with her day but could not ignore the wave of attention the incident was generating. Messages poured in from fans, journalists, and even strangers. She read through some of the comments and felt a mix of emotions. There was anger on her behalf, support, and admiration, but there was also concern about how the officer would respond and whether the situation would escalate further. She wanted to use her voice wisely, to turn a moment of humiliation into a lesson in respect and calmness. She took some time to reflect on the incident privately. Sitting in her home gym, she thought about her own reactions and why she had chosen not to retaliate. She realized it was because she valued the long-term impact of her actions more than the temporary satisfaction of anger. A slap could hurt physically, but it was how she responded that would define the story. Her calmness had already sparked conversations, showing people that dignity was stronger than aggression. The officer, in turn, was forced to confront his actions directly. He received a formal notice from his department that an internal review was underway. The documents described the incident, emphasizing the inappropriateness of his behavior. Reading those words was difficult for him. He had to admit that he had acted unprofessionally and allowed personal frustration to dictate his behavior. The reality of facing consequences slowly sank in, and a deep sense of remorse began to take root. He thought about how Ronda had reacted. Her calm and composed manner had made him feel small, powerless, and exposed. It was an unfamiliar feeling, and it was not pleasant. He realized that he had been taught to expect fear or submission, not grace and dignity. That contrast highlighted everything he had done wrong. The lesson was clear. Power without respect and restraint was empty, and now he had to learn humility. Ronda, meanwhile, received requests from local media to comment on the incident. She chose her words carefully, emphasizing respect, patience, and the importance of handling conflict calmly. She spoke about how the event reminded her that everyone deserved fair treatment, and she encouraged others to consider how they reacted in moments of tension. Her message resonated with many, and the story began to be seen not just as a confrontation but as a lesson in human behavior. The officer knew he needed to take further steps. He sought advice from mentors and counselors, wanting to understand the deeper reasons behind his impulsive reaction. He realized that stress, fatigue, and personal frustration had contributed, but he also understood that these were not excuses. A person in authority had to maintain composure regardless of circumstances. This realization was humbling and marked the beginning of a personal transformation. Ronda, on the other hand, focused on her own routine and mental strength. She continued training, speaking engagements, and mentoring young athletes. She reflected on how moments like the cafe incident tested character. She realized that public attention could magnify the impact of personal choices, and her calm response had shown that strength was not just physical, but moral. Every action, even in small, unexpected moments, could teach something meaningful. The incident sparked broader discussions. People talked about how to deal with authority, respect for others, and the importance of personal composure. Social media, forums, and news outlets debated the officer's actions, the implications of power abuse, and Ronda's remarkable handling of the situation. The officer felt the weight of public scrutiny, but it also pushed him to reflect more deeply. He had a choice: continue with the same attitude or genuinely grow and change. He began attending sensitivity and professional development workshops. He learned techniques for handling stress, communication strategies for conflict situations, and ways to maintain respect and authority without aggression. Each lesson was a step toward becoming a better officer and a better human being. He realized that true strength was in restraint and understanding, not in dominance or physical force. Ronda, hearing about the officer's steps to improve, felt a cautious optimism. She had no desire for revenge or humiliation. Her focus remained on positive impact and setting an example. She hoped that her calm approach could inspire the officer to reflect, change, and eventually act responsibly. She believed in the potential for personal growth, even in those who made mistakes. As days turned into weeks, the incident slowly faded from the public eye, but its lessons remained. Ronda continued to emphasize respect and integrity in her work and personal life. The officer continued to work on himself, facing the consequences of his actions while striving to improve. Both had been affected deeply, though in different ways. Ronda had reinforced her reputation for strength and grace, while the officer faced the difficult but necessary process of self-reflection and change. The incident became a quiet story of transformation. It was no longer about the slap or the embarrassment, but about what happened afterward. How a moment of impulsive anger could lead to learning, growth, and awareness. Ronda's calmness had set the tone, turning a potentially violent situation into a moment of education for everyone involved. The officer's remorse and willingness to change reflected the power of accountability and reflection. In the end, both experienced growth. Ronda's example inspired people to handle conflict with dignity, patience, and understanding. The officer's experience reminded others that mistakes are opportunities for learning, and that true responsibility comes from facing consequences and striving to do better. The story of that day at the cafe became an illustration of human resilience, humility, and the profound impact of calm, respectful behavior. The cafe itself remained a quiet place, but it had been the setting of a lesson that extended far beyond its walls. Customers who had witnessed the incident would remember the courage, the restraint, and the way a single moment could teach so much about character. For Ronda, it was another reminder that life often tested strength in unexpected ways, and that the greatest victories were not always won in the ring, but in how one treated others. Even in moments of injustice, the officer, carrying the memory of the incident, approached his duties with renewed focus. He treated every person with respect, remembered the lessons he had learned, and understood the lasting impact of his actions. Ronda, continuing her journey, remained an example of composure, strength, and integrity. Their paths had crossed in conflict, but the result was a story of personal growth, public reflection, and the quiet power of dignity and accountability. The weeks following the cafe incident were filled with reflection, change, and a growing awareness of consequences. The officer continued to feel the weight of his actions. Every interaction with the public reminded him of the moment when he had lost control, and he realized that his behavior had not only affected Ronda, but also his own integrity and reputation. It was a difficult journey, confronting the truth about himself, but he understood that genuine change could only come through deep reflection and consistent effort. He attended professional workshops focusing on communication, conflict management, and emotional control. Each session forced him to think critically about his behavior and the reasons behind it. He began to see patterns in his actions, moments when stress and frustration had caused him to overreact. These lessons were not easy, and the officer often felt discomfort as he confronted his shortcomings. But slowly he started to internalize the idea that authority was a privilege, not a tool for anger or humiliation. Ronda, meanwhile, was adjusting to the aftermath in her own way. She continued her routine, but now she also had a heightened awareness of how moments of conflict could escalate, and how her calmness had made a real difference. She received messages from fans who admired her restraint, people who had been inspired to reconsider their own reactions in stressful situations. The attention was both humbling and motivating. She realized that her actions, even in private or unexpected moments, could influence others in profound ways. The cafe where the incident had taken place became a quiet landmark in a story that people were still talking about. Patrons who had witnessed the event shared their experiences with friends and family, recounting how Ronda had remained composed despite the humiliation. Her reaction became a model of strength, showing that it was possible to face aggression without resorting to retaliation. It was a simple but powerful lesson that resonated far beyond the walls of the small cafe. The officer made a conscious decision to reach out to Ronda personally. He wanted to apologize again, not just because he had to, but because he genuinely felt remorse. Writing the message was difficult. He struggled to find the right words that could convey sincerity without seeming forced. He expressed regret for his actions, acknowledged the impact they had on her, and emphasized that he was committed to becoming a better person and officer. It was a vulnerable moment for him, a step toward accountability and humility. Ronda read the message carefully. She recognized the sincerity behind it, understanding that people could grow and change when confronted with their mistakes. She replied thoughtfully, acknowledging his apology while reinforcing the lesson that such actions were unacceptable. Her response was kind but firm, showing that forgiveness did not mean ignoring the wrongdoing. This exchange became another example of how communication, honesty, and respect could resolve conflict and foster understanding. The officer continued to implement changes in his professional conduct. He became more mindful in interactions, listening attentively, and ensuring that his authority was exercised fairly. He reflected on each encounter, asking himself whether he was acting with patience and respect. The internal transformation was slow but steady. He began to feel a renewed sense of purpose in his role, understanding that true authority required empathy, self-control, and awareness of others' dignity. Ronda, seeing the positive steps taken by the officer, felt a sense of closure. She understood that the situation had brought growth for both of them, even though it began with conflict. She continued to speak publicly about respect and resilience, sharing her experience as a real-life example of how composure could influence outcomes positively. Her words resonated with many, inspiring conversations about human behavior, accountability, and the importance of handling conflict thoughtfully. In the weeks that followed, the public conversation expanded. News articles and social media posts highlighted not only the incident, but the subsequent actions taken by both Ronda and the officer. Commentators praised Ronda's calmness and the officer's willingness to reflect and improve. The story became more than a tale of humiliation. It became a narrative about growth, integrity, and the power of restraint. At the cafe, the staff had recovered from the initial shock. They spoke of the event with a mix of amazement and respect for Ronda's behavior. Customers who had witnessed the incident continued to recount the story, emphasizing her poise and how the atmosphere had shifted from tension to reflection. Even though the incident had caused a moment of discomfort, it left a lasting impression about how actions, both impulsive and deliberate, affect others. Ronda used the incident as a teaching moment in her mentoring sessions. She shared the story with young athletes, emphasizing that true strength involved patience, composure, and moral courage. She highlighted the idea that being physically powerful was only one aspect of strength, and that how one treated others in unexpected situations often defined character more than any victory in the ring. Her words inspired her students, many of whom carried the lesson into their own lives and interactions. The officer continued to work quietly on his personal growth. He reflected on how his actions had been influenced by stress and frustration, and developed strategies to remain calm under pressure. He sought advice from colleagues and mentors, learning how to approach situations with empathy and patience. Each day presented opportunities to practice these lessons, and slowly he began to regain a sense of confidence, not through force or dominance, but through understanding, respect, and accountability. Ronda, meanwhile, remained focused on her goals, balancing training, public appearances, and charitable work. The incident had reminded her of the unpredictability of life, but she saw it as a reinforcement of the values she already held: integrity, patience, and the importance of acting thoughtfully even in difficult situations. She continued to inspire others, showing that grace under pressure was a quality as valuable as any physical skill. As time passed, both Ronda and the officer reflected on the broader implications of the event. For Ronda, it became another story in a life filled with challenges, a reminder that strength was often measured by composure and moral courage. For the officer, it was a turning point, an opportunity to reassess his actions, understand their impact, and commit to becoming a better person and professional. The incident had begun with a moment of conflict, but evolved into a lesson in accountability, reflection, and growth. The public, meanwhile, had shifted its focus from outrage to discussion about respect, dignity, and responsibility. People debated not only the actions of the officer but also the way Ronda had responded. The conversation emphasized the importance of role models and the impact of behavior in shaping public perceptions and social norms. Ronda's composure became an example of how individuals could influence outcomes positively, even in unexpected and challenging situations. In personal interactions, Ronda continued to emphasize empathy, patience, and the importance of calm communication. She encouraged those around her to consider their reactions carefully and to remember that every action carries weight. Her story became a reference point, showing that how one responds to adversity often defines character more than the adversity itself. For the officer, the experience remained a constant reminder to act with care and respect. He carried the lessons learned into his professional life, striving to make amends and to approach each situation with a renewed sense of responsibility. His journey was ongoing, but the steps he had taken reflected genuine growth and a commitment to integrity. The cafe incident, once a source of shock and humiliation, had evolved into a story of reflection, accountability, and the power of calm, thoughtful action. Both Ronda and the officer had been affected deeply, but in ways that ultimately led to learning and growth. The story became a quiet but meaningful example of how human behavior, when guided by patience, respect, and integrity, could turn even difficult moments into opportunities for positive change. Through it all, Ronda remained grounded, continuing to inspire and teach by example. Her response had shown that true strength lay not in retaliation or aggression, but in the courage to face injustice with composure and clarity. The officer's journey demonstrated the importance of acknowledging mistakes, reflecting deeply, and striving to improve. Together, their story highlighted the potential for growth and transformation, even when a situation begins with conflict and anger. Months had passed since the cafe incident, but its impact lingered in both Ronda and the officers' lives. For Ronda, the incident had become part of a larger narrative about patience, strength, and human dignity. She continued to train, mentor, and appear in public events, but now with a quiet awareness that even ordinary moments could carry profound lessons. She understood that her calm response had not only affected those who witnessed it directly, but also inspired countless others who had learned about the story through news, social media, and conversations. The officer had changed in ways that were noticeable, even to himself. The daily reminders of the mistake he had made fueled his commitment to improvement. He approached every situation with thoughtfulness and care, making sure his authority was used responsibly. Simple acts like listening more attentively and taking a deep breath before responding became habits. He had learned that accountability was not just about following rules, but about embodying respect, empathy, and humility in every action. Ronda continued to share her experience, speaking to audiences about the importance of handling conflict with dignity. She emphasized that true strength was as much about character as it was about physical ability. In workshops and interviews, she recounted the cafe incident without anger, highlighting the lessons it offered about composure, patience, and the ripple effect of actions. People listened, inspired by her ability to turn a personal challenge into a universal message about respect and integrity. The officer, too, found ways to contribute positively to the public conversation. He spoke anonymously at workshops and training sessions about the importance of self-awareness and emotional control. He shared his story not as an excuse but as a cautionary tale of how one moment of poor judgment could have far-reaching consequences. By owning his mistake and showing his commitment to improvement, he became an example of personal accountability and the possibility of change. Both Ronda and the officer occasionally reflected privately on the incident. Ronda appreciated that her patience and calmness had inspired change, not only in the officer but in others who had followed the story. The officer recognized that the moment of humiliation he had caused had ultimately led to his own growth and a deeper understanding of responsibility. The experience, though painful, had taught both of them valuable lessons about human behavior, power, and respect. In her daily life, Ronda focused on her own growth and well-being. She spent time with family and friends, trained rigorously, and continued mentoring young athletes. Each day, she carried the lessons of patience and integrity with her, applying them not just in public moments but in private interactions as well. She had seen firsthand how calmness could diffuse tension and create opportunities for learning rather than conflict. The officer's journey was ongoing, marked by constant self-reflection and conscious effort to improve. He remained aware of the past mistake, using it as a guide to behave more thoughtfully and responsibly. He built better communication skills, listened more attentively, and treated everyone he encountered with respect. Slowly, he earned back the trust of colleagues and the public, demonstrating that true change was possible when one took responsibility and acted with integrity. The public continued to reference the incident, not for the slap, but for the lessons it had provided. People admired Ronda's composure, using it as an example of how to handle difficult situations with grace. They discussed how the officer's acknowledgement of wrongdoing and efforts to improve reflected the power of accountability and personal growth. The story became a teaching tool, showing that even moments of conflict could lead to meaningful lessons and positive change. Ronda herself remained humble throughout the process. She never sought fame from the incident, but instead focused on the broader message it carried. She encouraged others to approach challenges with calmness, integrity, and respect, showing that real strength often lies in controlling one's response rather than asserting dominance. Her example became a quiet source of inspiration, demonstrating that dignity and patience could influence outcomes more than aggression or anger. The officer continued to face challenges, but he approached them with a renewed mindset. Every interaction became an opportunity to practice patience, to ensure that his actions were fair, respectful, and thoughtful. The memory of the incident at the cafe remained a guide, reminding him of the responsibility that came with authority and the consequences of failing to exercise it wisely. He understood that real power was measured by the way one treated others, not by the ability to dominate or intimidate. Ronda's influence extended beyond her immediate circle. Young athletes, fans, and even professionals in various fields reflected on her response, learning that strength was multifaceted and that patience and moral courage were as important as skill and talent. She had turned a moment of personal challenge into a story with a universal lesson, that dignity, respect, and composure could change the course of events and leave a lasting impression on those who witnessed them. The officer, in turn, began mentoring new recruits in his profession, emphasizing the importance of self-control, respect, and ethical behavior. He shared his experience openly, explaining the consequences of his past actions and encouraging others to reflect on their own behavior. His journey became a living example of the potential for growth and the importance of accountability, inspiring those around him to strive for better conduct and awareness. Ronda and the officer never sought to reconnect publicly, but their lives remained linked through the lessons learned. Each had changed because of that moment, one through patience, grace, and moral courage, the other through reflection, remorse, and a commitment to personal growth. Their paths diverged in daily life, yet the shared experience left a lasting imprint on both, shaping how they approached conflict, authority, and human interaction. Over time, the cafe incident became a story told not with anger or shame, but with reflection and learning. People who had witnessed it, followed it online, or heard about it used it as a reminder that moments of conflict could be handled with dignity and respect. It showed that mistakes, when acknowledged and learned from, could lead to personal growth and positive change. It was a story about human nature, the power of calm, and the potential for transformation in every person. Ronda continued to live her life fully, always aware that her response to challenges had the power to teach and inspire. She never forgot the lesson that grace and composure could turn even a painful moment into an opportunity for understanding and growth. Her calmness had not only diffused a tense situation, but had also sparked a process of reflection and change in the officer and in the public eye. The officer, now more mindful and thoughtful, continued to build his career with a renewed sense of purpose. He approached every day as a chance to do better, guided by the memory of the mistake and the lessons learned from it. He understood that accountability and respect were ongoing commitments, and he lived with the awareness that his actions had the power to influence others positively or negatively. The story of the cafe incident ultimately became a tale of personal and public transformation. It highlighted the importance of patience, humility, and moral courage. It showed that even moments of conflict and humiliation could lead to growth and understanding if handled with composure and integrity. Ronda's example, combined with the officer's journey of accountability, became a powerful lesson for everyone who heard it. In the end, both Ronda and the officer carried forward the lessons of that day. One continued to inspire with calmness, dignity, and strength. The other continued to grow, reflect, and act with integrity. Their story reminded the world that strength is not measured by force or dominance, but by the courage to act with respect, patience, and awareness. It became a quiet but enduring symbol of how human behavior, when guided by reflection and responsibility, can transform conflict into a pathway for learning and growth, leaving a lasting impact on everyone involved.